Excuse me, coconut. Alright, so today's chore, I went and foraged for stinging nettle. A little bit maybe crazy because I did it in shorts and barehanded. The secret about nettle is to grasp it firmly. You see? No sting. But now if I go to nettle and I graze over the hairs, now I'll have a little nettle sting. And what the nettle sting does is it actually creates almost a toxin. So it penetrates your skin and starts to release formic acid. And now what formic acid does in your body is it releases histamine and serotonins, which is really, really interesting. So the history of nettle is actually quite magical, because what they realized was that in Rome, now it sounds like I'm bullshitting, but I'm not. I'm just trying to remember my facts. In ancient Rome, they would march a lot. They would march, and apparently their feet would get pretty tired. And so what they discovered was that the Roman nettle, which is actually way more severe than the English nettle, so I can't imagine what this is, I have no clue. But what they used to do is they actually used to whip their joints to elicit a sting. Because after the sting, after the rash, after the formic acid, they found relief. And so if we fast forward that knowledge to today, a lot of research and naturopathic research goes into stinging nettle for arthritis. I actually heard about that in Britain, in my time in Britain, is that stinging nettle is great for arthritic joints. And at first I thought it was a wives' tale, but there's more science to it than I would have thought. There's also emerging science about the role of histamine and serotonin from nettle and the interaction with the human body, and maybe some mental health improvements and impacts. So it's really interesting. What was also really interesting about nettle, now let me tell you about nettle because it's magical. It's a magical vegetable. Plant. It's not a vegetable. Well, actually, to my second point, it is a vegetable. So it actually is a culinary delight. I don't know if I should be eating it like this, but I'm gonna. It's interesting. It's kind of bitter. It has some bitters. It'd be a really nice like tincture. Like you can make a little bitter tincture. But anyway, you can use it for tea, you can use it for food, and you can also use it for textile. So a really cool sort of thing I learned about nettle is that in World War I, cotton supply was so scarce. You couldn't find cotton. And you think about that, why couldn't they find cotton? Well, they sent masses of people into army, into war. And all of those people needed uniforms. And so that, with the Industrial Revolution, etc., a lot of sewing, and a lot of textiles were being produced at that time. And so cotton was in short supply. So what else could they use? Well, they could use nettle, stinging nettle. And so the Germans, during World War I, had stinging nettle uniforms. And I'm not sure if they're itchy, and I'm not sure if they suffer from arthritis. Those are mysteries that I'm not sure of. But there's a new emerging sort of trend in finding alternative textiles. So Patagonia is really cool for this. But there's also a lot of really interesting movements about moving away from cotton or synthetics. Cotton production requires a lot of pesticides. And as we know, pesticides are not great. They're not great for us, they're not great for the planet, they're not great for anything. And so there's a movement towards what else can we use as textiles. So you may have heard of hemp, but did you also know that you can also use nettle. So nettle is a really interesting textile. Nettle also has a really cool and interesting criminal element. There's a dark history to nettle. So nettle can often signify mass graves. Yeah. So what nettle does is it relies a lot on phosphorus, and phosphorus is one of the elements in the in the earth that allow plants to grow. So nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Phosphorus in that sort of spectrum is responsible for root growth, and so nettle loves phosphorus. Nettle goes where there's phosphorus. What also happens when someone dies is they release a lot of phosphorus into the earth. And so if there's a huge deposit of phosphorus, you're also going to see a huge growth of stinging nettle. And so if you put that science together with criminology, perhaps you can find mass graves. I also just picked all of these from a mass nettle patch. So I won't be going digging anytime soon because I am not equipped to find a mass grave. What else? Nettle can also be used for shampoo, believe it or not, for male pattern baldness, which I don't have a problem with. But hear me out. Nettle can reduce DHT, dihydrotestosterone. What is dihydrotestosterone? Well, it's toxic testosterone. And how do we get dihydrotestosterone? Well, from processed foods. So a lot of the foods that we're eating are high in sugar and high in insulins and high in carbs and not high in nutrients or proteins or the macro and micronutrients that you need to survive. So the majority of food that we're eating is killing us. We already know that. But did you also know that it's making you bald? Because spikes in insulin and spikes in blood sugar also attribute to spikes in DHT. The more DHT you have, the more balding you will have, the more male pattern balding you will experience. So, nettle, the little milk in the root can be turned into a shampoo, and it's actually known to penetrate and reduce or balance your DHT levels. Balanced DHT levels means less chance of male pattern baldness. So that's my little shampoo commercial. What else do I want to tell you? So, I want to tell you why I'm using this. So, nettle's also really cool because it evolutionarily evolved, you heard me, to sting. So, the leaves and the nutrients in nettle are so sought after, so sought after, that this is such an invaluable source of nutrients. Animals know they want it. Horses, chickens, and even humans at one point knew they wanted it. So did the plant. The plant was like, I know you want me. So it evolved to sting. So that meant that things didn't eat it. So that meant it could survive. If you're a Darwinist, survival of the fittest. Why do things evolve and why do things adapt? Interesting. So now horses won't eat it. Now cows won't eat it. Now chickens won't eat it. But if you hang it upside down and dry it, the sting goes away. Really, really sensitive to dehydration. So as soon as the sting goes away, I have unlocked all the nutrients in these leaves. When cows eat nettle, they're known to produce better and more milk. When horse eat, how do you say plural horse? Horses or horse? When horses eat nettle, they get a shinier coat. And when chickens eat nettle, they lay better eggs. And they lay with more enthusiasm. So that was my chore today, was to go to the mass grave site and pick some nettle. I'm hanging it upside down. I'm gonna feed it to the chickens. You'll also notice here that I have some alfalfa. So we are growing alfalfa for them. I'm also gonna experiment with dehydrating that. And I actually think the chickens will love this. If there's any fun facts that I've missed about nettle, please let me know, because it's a really interesting plant.